Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is David Mudd. I'm the Global Head of Digital Trust Assurance at BSI, the British Standards Institution, and the host for today's event. Great to see some familiar faces around the table. Hey, Louise is here. Brilliant. And a full list of speakers as well, and so many of you joining us online. Good to see some familiar friends that have been with us on the journey here, which has been for a couple of years now, and some new faces too. So today's theme, really, over the last couple of years, we've been exploring the needs, benefits, opportunities around a common approach to cryptographic module security and building trust in that security. And we've had, I think, agreement and understanding from every single one of the stakeholders in this ecosystem that this is a good idea. And what we need to do now is look for the specific opportunities to really move this forward. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to start off with me as usual. I love to take the microphone for a certain amount of time, but I promise to hand over to our experts to speak on 3 subjects today. 2 of them expanding on what we've really talked through before and now really bring it for real. And then we'll be starting with our opening talk from Roland Atoui from Red Alert Labs, who'll be looking very specifically then at some of these real-world applications and implications, and bringing a fresh dimension to some of the topics we've picked on previously around how the different certifications and standards, etc., all link in together. Then we'll have Louise from DECRA going through again some of the issues around test tools. This is something that's had a lot of feedback to us since the last event in Singapore last October. So just going through that again, because I think that really kind of sets the scene in a practical term of how we can move forward together. And then over to our very own Mustanir, who will be joining us remotely from BSI's labs in the UK, and then talking more about the work that he's been doing around developing a credible, viable, and effective scheme to actually bring all this together. We're then going to have a short networking break while we actually digest some of the comments from the previous speakers, and then really the highlight of these events is always the panel discussion. We've got a packed panel today. Everyone has got something to say on this. So we're going to have a lot to squeeze in there. And then I'll summarize and then look at where we go from here. Now, the timings we've got on here are reasonably flexible. There's a lot of content today. So although we've got a break in there, if we do end up overrunning on some of the talks, doesn't matter. We'll just eat into that break. It's far more important that we really share some detailed insight into the subject today. So key point then about the subject today. Why are we even talking about this? Why is it something that is even important and worth investing time? This all started a couple of years back with a conversation against a backdrop of a huge shift in digital transformation that was accelerated through a global pandemic and was accompanied by the industrialization of cybercrime, where the criminals looking to capitalize on this new target-rich environment and with a host of new ways to exploit their victims. So against this backdrop, there's been increasing pressure on industry, manufacturers, and governments to collectively come up with quicker, faster, better, but still smarter networks and systems. And combine that with a frustration about the time, complexity, and cost of bringing these solutions to market. And once they're on the market, maintaining that trust. And then also, it's not just about the complexities themselves. We also were then looking at the increasing fragmentation and diversification of government approaches. Quite often, each looking to bring their own set of standards or requirements, where essentially we're all trying to solve the same problem. We're in a event yesterday, a cybersecurity roundtable close by here. And one of the things talking through around governments together around the table was we're all different governments, all different nations. Cybercrime is one nation. Cybercrime is the third biggest economy in the world. There are no borders there. So the more borders we put up, the more we are fragmenting our approach back. So the need for a common approach, I think, has never been more important than it is today. So we started with that conversation. There's Miguel, looking very dapper, leaning against the bar, sipping on a little vermouth or something like that. No, this was actually us here in a couple of years ago at MWC. We then moved on, okay, so if we're going to have a common approach, who actually benefits? Because unless you can identify the benefits here, no one's going to move forward. And very quickly, it was clear, everybody benefits from this. Manufacturers benefit because it's quicker, it's easier to get the products out to market. Governments benefit. There's less overhead, there's less complexity for them about bringing products to market. System providers benefit. And ultimately, society, users benefit. So the benefits here are absolutely clear. We all benefit from this common approach. We then moved on. Okay, where do we start with this? And BSI, being the world's first national standards body, a founding member of ISO, we've got a very strong view that a common approach starts with global consensus best practice. And there are loads of views and opinions about what best practice for security by design of cryptographic modules looks like. But ultimately, over 100 countries effectively have agreed and signed up to the ISO IEC standard 19790 being best practice for security by design. So a common approach has to start with common global consensus best practice. And there we were, this is one of the Singapore events. So we're starting to move on now from a conversation, putting together a white paper on what that approach should be, and where is it really based on? And then again, looking in more detail, we can talk about this baseline standard, but actually a common approach is going to be more than that. We have to look at a core baseline, but we have to acknowledge that different countries will have in particular different perhaps algorithmic requirements and various other particular national needs, but that can all be built around a core baseline. And also this common approach requires a wider understanding and acceptance between test labs and certification bodies. There are ISO standards out there around how labs work together and how certification bodies work together. So we're not inventing anything new. We are leveraging existing best practice to help all the stakeholders here. And then this is where we're looking to bring this to life. The last event, progress in a couple of ways. Firstly, it was great to see the first 4 companies actually receiving certificates against a general certification against the standard. But it was also really great at that particular event to hear from governments actually speaking and joining in the conversation. And for me, this was really transformational to start to get that really positive engagement. And we started to talk around, the practical implications, common test tool sets and environments. And we need to touch on that again today because I think that's such a key part. Another key thing we talked about previously was the comparison with common criteria approach. And Miguel, as our real, I would suppose, Jedi Knight, Jedi Master, superstar when it comes to understanding the different frameworks, the different methodologies, and the standards here. He has a foot in both camps and was presenting to us how the two effectively are 2 different approaches, but they don't have to compete. And that comparison and seeing where 19790 sits alongside common criteria looking at the product level, and 19790 representing best practice for that critical part of the cryptographic module. So some real progress, but the bit of a gap here, progress and what? There's a little bit of a so what here, and this is what we really want to get onto today. So we all understand it's a good, great idea. We all understand effectively what an overall best practice approach looks like. How do we really bring it to life? And this is what we really want to talk about today. So we're now going to go on to the keynote talks. And first up, I'd like to introduce Roland Atouy from Red Alert Labs. Roland, not only is he managing a business that's right at the heart of this, he's a very well-known speaker in this and other environments. And Roland, I've heard you speak around Internet of Things and other devices as well. So really looking forward to see what you can bring to us with your fresh perspective. So Roland, our first speaker, over to you.
Thanks a lot, David. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's really an honor, and thanks a lot for this invitation. In the upcoming 20 minutes that I have, or a bit more probably, I would be presenting somehow a walk through the different types of applications that could be very interesting for this global approach of certification for cryptographic modules across sectors. And the idea behind it is really to reflect on how this actually could be helpful, specific, and really for different types of industry, what would be the drivers to adoption. For those actually, before jumping into the topic, for those who do not know Red Alert Labs, we are based in Paris, France. We are bringing trust to this connected world, and we have been very active in developing certification schemes and also operating certification schemes on the EU and international levels. We have, of course, a consultancy department, we have a lab, and we also operate on developing some tools that actually also help streamlining the certification processes. And that's actually some of the areas where we cover, of course, all based on different types of standard schemes that are applicable mostly in the IoT from chip to cloud, some of them actually on a horizontal approach, and others actually more vertical on different vertical markets. So, so we talked about crypto modules. It's important just to understand what are actually these cryptographic modules today and how actually they are used, of course, in different types of applications. In an actual ISO definition of the cryptographic module, it is, of course, the hardware, software, and the firmware that is implementing cryptographic functionalities. It is also important to understand that that part has to draw some boundaries between itself and everything that is communicating with, surrounding it in its environment. It could be other hardware, software, firmware. And so the goal is really to provide the crypto operations functionalities that are really becomes actually the heart of every single security property that we actually to bring into an application, with the goal to, of course, protect against different types of cyber attacks that could be physical or logical. And to do that, several standards, schemes, best practices has been developed around the world to tackle different parts of this cryptography. So either actually on the global perspectives or on protocol-based specific, for example, to authentication protocols. Others are, took actually an approach really based on standards that defines cryptographic modules, like the ISO 19790 definitely. And others actually also were developed to bring an approach that allows us to evaluate, to test, to bring trust or to trust those cryptographic modules in a sense where how much they could be actually complying with the security requirements that were defined, but also how much robust that could be against different types of attacks. So as you can see, these are pretty much diverse. And the thing is that they vary in different types of regions. They could be applicable on the government level, on the region, for example, European level, on the industry level. And that actually indeed creates a lot of challenges that David mentioned a bit. It creates fragmentation, definitely, but also complexity to the vendors that have to do like a lot of effort to be able to meet all these requirements globally. And also, we could imagine that there will be like a lack of or compatibility or different types of issues in compatibility, imagining that a product that has been or cryptographic module that had been certified in one country would have to integrate or work with another product actually that had been certified elsewhere. It becomes a nightmare. So it adds a lot of costs, efforts, time that we need actually to tackle. And those challenges do not make it easy for the manufacturers to meet time to market. And unfortunately, that has a lot of implications on innovation by the end. So what if actually we try to transform these challenges into opportunities? So we then actually talk about a global cryptographic module certification scheme or approach. But it's important to understand that an approach has to be pragmatic in a sense where it has to provide some compatibility with other existing standard schemes and actually should have to meet regulations. It has to take into account composition approaches because we're talking about really components that would be always integrated and work together with other types of software layers, and it becomes very important to understand how that actually evaluation or security that we bring on the crypto module level would help other layers to bring or the same level of trust to the different types of business applications. We would talk about approaches that needs to take into account the maintenance perspective, so a dynamic approach of whatever certification that we're getting by the end, and the status of that certificate needs to follow up with the changes of those the environment, but also the products or the crypto as well. Most importantly, to follow up with the state of the art of attacks, and also to allow a smooth evolvement and a trust that actually will follow the whole life cycle of the products. So we need to have a scheme that also bring trust, is based on also some knowledge that is brought by labs, accredited labs, certification bodies that themselves also has been accredited under or based on standards that are international. That's very important aspect to consider. And that's basically one of the things that we need to talk about is, I think in the next session would be about the toolings and the automation that needs also to follow up with that scheme, allowing a better adoption, a smoother implication of the different stakeholders in the certification processes, and a better or objective actually results. So cryptographic modules, as you know, are definitely could be found everywhere. It's important to understand that they have potential more sensitivity in the different types of applications, and therefore actually when we talk about certification approaches, we need to take into account the risks and the different level of assurance that are required to meet the market expectation. So what I'm gonna go actually through is actually to walk you through every single sector to see how these actually could be applied in the real world, but also what are the current types of standards that actually exist and schemes that are somehow trying to tackle the cryptography directly or indirectly. So in the financial services, there are actually interesting applications, and many actually has been certified on the point of sales terminals, ATMs. We've seen actually, of course, HSMs that are really specific to the securing the transactions, banking transactions. We've seen applications actually on mobile banking more and more actually coming into force and relying on cryptographic modules. And those actually has been governed so far by different types of certifications. We know the PCI DSS that is valid for all the, let's say, types of stakeholder merchants that are involved in the payment card industry. We note the ISO 2701, which also focus more on the information system, but is also, for example, pushed by regulations such as the PSD2 in Europe and the GDPR as well. Even if it's not specifically requiring specific cryptographic controls, it has, you know, an approach to manage this part as well. And most interestingly, we seen the payment card, actually industry-based certifications, where we are capable of certifying the application, the banking application, through EMVCO scheme, for instance, that itself, by the way, is based as well on common criteria and takes a real interesting approach to certify the cryptographic operations and modules. In the healthcare as well, encryption and cryptography are critical to secure the sensitive patient healthcare data across different digital systems and applications, from encryption to secure messaging, but also really interesting lately to look into the medical device sector, where they are becoming more and more smart, connected, and also definitely more subject to cyber attacks and you know, requiring much more and more security, relying on cryptography. We note the HIPAA, for example, which is based in the standard based in the US, that also, for example, there every product that goes into the HIPAA, let's say, scope, usually goes through FIPS certification to prove its level of security and high level of security assurance that is required as well in this sector. There are different types of standards that also are on the international level, guiding the manufacturers to build security by design and take into account the cryptographic as well. And we note the medical device regulation in the EU, which is also merging to bring on some types of certifications for medical devices. That is a real field to explore as well when it comes to looking into the crypto area. Governments and defense organizations definitely rely on advanced security technology like HSMs, encryptors, secure communications, how to protect sensitive data. And we see definitely in the US that FIPS actually is used for, you know, government procurement requirements. In France, for example, the RGS is also relying on common criteria to be able to provide requirements to the different types of products that actually involves cryptography on different types of level of assurance. But there are country-specific as well schemes, regulations such as OSCCA in China or GCVMP in Japan. The IT sector definitely is a very interesting area for cryptography. Various hardware, software solutions use encryption to secure the data, communication, and storage. We note many types of application usually comes more on the system level, on the information system. These are certifications that are voluntary in general, but depends on really sometimes the criticity of the application. NIS2, for example, in the EU will enforce more and more actually certifications for companies that actually falls into the NIS2, for example. FIDO Alliance has, for example, a certification scheme that allows to certify authenticators, enterprise or consumers, and those actually really interesting areas that also are adopted in the IT or enterprise environments. In the telecom, we see a lot of applications from, critical that actually secure sensitive data and communication in the critical sectors, from VPNs to secure VoIP. And those actually are also follow some some standards that are developed by 3GPP, but also we've seen we see actually, for example, standards that are emerging, such as the NESAS in GSMA and the future EU 5G in the EU, that will also look into the whole 5C infrastructure, including, by the way, the SIM itself, which is by itself actually is usually certified through common criteria based on protection profiles that, of course, include in the target of evaluation cryptographic modules. On the IoT sector, it is really an area to explore more and more, because we look into different constraints and challenges for cryptography that would require some specific ways to implement these and bring trust to these ones, from lightweight crypto, for example, that would be implemented in more or less constrained devices. We see different types of platforms that are certified, but also end products that that are used in the consumer market or industrial market. Standards such as GN 303645 do provide approaches that to be able to, or requirements that are concerning also the cryptography, authentication, etc. Of course, we have NIST framework and the US Cyber Trust Mark that also is something that will emerge in the upcoming few years. CISIP, that is also a global platform certification scheme that is focused more on the IoT platform and the different regulations to follow up in, for example, in the EU, such as the Cyber Resilience Act, the Red Directive, that also have defined or are defining harmonized standards that actually will tackle the cryptography. I'm not going to go through the more in details on the different industrial automotive. It's very similar as well to the IoT sector, but in more industrial framework. There are different types of standards that are applicable. We talk about 62443 for the industrial certifications of product components, but also processes. And we know there's an ISO 21434 that is interesting to help in providing a framework that allows to get certification against the UNECE regulation R155 in the automotive industry. Retail and e-commerce are similar somehow to the financial sector, where we see mostly also GDPR compliance requiring some additional crypto functionalities to be implemented to protect from confidentiality. And energy and energy and utility as well. Different types of applications are taking into account an approach that also based on risks that are accepted in such actually industry, and those are also following different types of standards, as the NERC in the US, or even we see actually 2701 and 62351 internationally. So the benefit of having a unified approach is really to take into account all those schemes into perspective, the different particularity of each sector, and to simplify the compliance, right? The idea is really to allow companies to comply with different regulations in a less effort, but in a smart way as well. The idea is also to help in enhancing security. So when we talk about really building a standard or following standard is the motivator at the beginning is really to have a baseline of security to be able to get more trust in products, and that trust should be also mutual, allowing recognition across countries. So by the end, we would be able, with that approach, to reduce the effort and the costs. And we should think as well on the fact that crypto modules will be always actually involved in the in a supply chain model, because they will be transmitted from from suppliers to buyers in different, and they have very important role in the value chain. So a certification in that sense will bring additional layer of trust in each step of that supply chain, and enables more transparency and more traceability. So to end up, I think it's important to look into standards. That's actually the way we are taking today by looking into ISO 19790, and that's very important aspect to take into account. Look into composition, because it is important to see that few schemes around the world know how to solve the composition problem. We have a lot of experience in common criteria, but still few experiences with FIPS, and I think it's a good opportunity here to also bring additional perspectives and new things to solve those problems. Collaboration is definitely key. So I think if we lack this community to collaborate, we need to build it smartly. And of course, it's important even at this stage to get support and be able to automate. If you are a vendor, if you are one of the stakeholders that are involved, get in touch actually with that community to be able to build together actually the right framework that will help all of us actually solve the general problem. So with that, I think we'll open discussions to the panel later on many aspects and topics based on what I presented, and I'm happy to follow up with that. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Ronan. And a few key points there, really useful. A couple of key points I picked up on. Ronan, when you start talking about the potential applications, a couple of them really did leap out that maybe I hadn't really considered specifically before. Things like, particularly around EU regulations, so things like medical devices. I think that's a really interesting one in particular to pick up. And the other one as well around radio equipment directive, where I think one of the standards you listed up there now in the latest revision actually refers to 19790 as an option directly within there. So there's a couple of those things. But taking one step back, three comments I picked up actually. First one, this isn't just about making it quicker, easier and cheaper. As you said, this is actually enhancing security overall, that common approach and that common building trust. So yes, it does have an impact in terms of budgets and in terms of timescale, but I think that's a really good point, that common approach overall at a societal level is enhancing security. And the other one was around the life cycle. This isn't about a one-off certification to say this product met this specification on this date. It's about building trust and confidence that that product will remain secure throughout its intended life. And that means obviously things like patching, this kind of thing as well. But overall, looking at the organization's ability to maintain the product, to maintain continuity, to maintain the skill sets. So there's a lot more to this. As I was saying yesterday, you can't have a trust in a product that has any level of digital component to it unless you trust the organization that sits behind it. So to have trust in that product, a scheme has to consider that wider organizational approach. So totally agree. And the final one as well was around supply chain security. Haven't really picked up on that one as well, the importance of that. And we were discussing yesterday, supply chain is probably the biggest area of risk in most organizations right now. So a few really good points. The rest of it, I can't wait to get stuck into in the panel discussion around the potential here and some of the sectors you brought out. I'll be looking forward to hearing from the other panelists on that subject too. But we move on. Next, we have Louise, who has discussed really before around test tools, but it was such an important topic, and with quite a few guests, new guests, both here and online, it's something we wanted to revisit today. So, Louise, if you wouldn't mind taking the platform, and let's hear more about test tools.
Okay. Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Luis Garcia from DECRA. Thank you, Dave, for the introduction. Well, really happy to be here one more time, this time physically. Well, today we are going to talk about tools, trying to understand how relevant the tools are within a certification process. This is the agenda for today. We will start with the initial part, the background, trying to understand what are the needs of the industry. Yes, also checking what is the main role, the role that the main ISO standard are playing here. We will continue with talking about the tools, testing tool, but also non-testing tools. At the end, we will try to understand how we can bring trust on the tools, on the scheme, and many other things, and we will complete the presentation with some personal conclusions. Let's start a little bit with this timeline of the two main ISOs. The first one will be the 19790. This is sure. Now it's better? Thank you. Sorry. As I said, the 19790 is the main ISO standard. It's defining what is a model, what is the boundary and the scope of the certification, defining all the different areas. It was started in 2006 as based on the FIS 140-2, has been evolving in parallel until the version we have right now. And the last version is the update that it was released in 2015. The second main important ISO will be the 24759. This standard is the DTR. It defines the testing, the testing that the model needs to achieve, but also the vendor requirements. Okay, it was released a couple of years later, and yeah. Okay, it's better. Thank you. Okay, yeah. As I said, it was released a couple of years later in 2008. It has been evolving until the last release in 2017. Let me highlight what happens in 2019 when the NIST released the new standard for FIPS 140, the version 3. NIST adopt these two ISO standards like the baseline of this FIPS certifications. So, as you can imagine, since that time until today, these two ISO standards has been the reference worldwide for the crypto certification. At the same time, since 2019 until today, these two ISO standards have been evolving, has been updated, and it's expected that at the end of this year, hopefully in October, a new release of this standard will happen. So, let me anticipate you a little bit the impact it will have. As you can see, if we compare the current standard with the version that is being updated, you can see that we'll have more requirements, almost 100 more requirements, but also it will include a new annex considering the life cycle of the cryptographic module. So as you can see, the certification scope will be bigger, but at the same time, the industry is demanding quick certification process. So the only way to make that happen will be through using toolings and automation process. Otherwise, we will have a situation like this. This is the current situation, the FIPS standard. As a FIPS lab that we are, this is what we are suffering. As you can see there, this information is coming from this month. And there is a lot of information, but let me highlight the timing in the queue for certifying a module FIPS 140-2. It will be more than a year. If we check the part of 140-3, it will be almost 2 years. This is only the time in the queue. You also need to consider the time that the vendors and the module need to achieve in the queue. That is when the lab considers that everything is correct. But how we can improve this? Well, again, the answer will be tooling and automation process. But how can we do that? Well, I think one approach could be trying to define some kind of areas or a standalone domain where we should be able to identify or to create tool independently of the kind of model or level of certification. In this example, I have identified 4 of them, and let's see one by one how this could be happening. First of all, I think we should reinvent the wheel. I mean, finally, there is a lot of very good tools out there working and adopted by the community. So if we can reuse it, let's do it. Let's see one by one, as I said, starting by the algorithms, okay? Out there are many stakeholders having their own accreditation scheme, just like the NIST, Japanese scheme, Korean, or even the Spanish scheme, CCN. There are other stakeholder defining guidance, like the SOHA-IS or the ISO. Not always are consistent, this guidance between them. And that is something, one of the problems that we will see at the end. And also there are several tools, open source tools that can be reused for this purpose. In fact, all these schemes share the same methodologies based on input vectors. But let me highlight the scheme of the NIST, the ACBP, because last year they released the code. This right now is open source, and you can install in your own environment. And by yourself, you can check or you can verify if the implementation of the algorithm of your modules is correct, okay? If we talk about entropy source, for all of you that you don't know, the entropy source is what gives you the randomness. Finally, what you are generating a random number, you are using a deterministic algorithm. That means that for the same input, you all will obtain the same output. So what gives you the randomness is the entropy source. Here, there are 2 key stakeholders, like the NIST and BSI. In fact, both of them are working together to release a common standard, but that is something will happen in the future. But what we have today, both of them has public tool that we can use to verify the implementation of our entropy source. In fact, last year, NIST released a new program for the certification of the entropy source, not only the entropy source, like an standalone, not the whole module, okay? But let me also highlight other stakeholders are defining guidance, like the ISO or the Chinese scheme. Okay, if we talk about non-invasive, this is maybe it's not familiar for you. I'm talking about side channel. There are not many stakeholders out there, and maybe this is because until this moment, the ISO certification program has not required this as mandatory, but it will be in the new release. So since we understood this in the grant, we started working on it, hiring people to develop tool and understanding about this common area. Clearly, the main stakeholder defining guidance is the ISO with these two standards. There are other stakeholders in the private sector that also have tools for this, and not too many, but some of them. Open source tools that are out there, and we have used, and we consider that are quite useful for starting, like those. Okay, last about testing tool is security tool. This is the only, the assertion 11.30 is the only place in the standard where you can see that the standard talk about tools. But it's talk about security tools, what means that tool for finding errors, malfunction, or even weakness, okay? But it not talk clearly about vulnerabilities. We consider that the ISO standards should go one step further and clearly demand to the community that the module are free from vulnerabilities. But talking about this tool, this is in the bottom part, we have defined some of the tools that we use as part of our certification process, and some techniques where we use this tool, like the code analysis, the debugging, just to check the behavior of the module in all the states. But also the memory leaks, this is a requirement, an important requirement from the operational environment area for software modules. It's said that the memory space of the cryptographic module process cannot be modified or accessed by any other process in the operating system. Finally, the fuzzing. Fuzzing is very useful technique just to see that the module is able to understand or to handle, let's say in that way, all the different input that could receive through the different interfaces or APIs. Okay, but only tools for testing? Obviously no. I mean, if we are looking for, if we want to be more ambitious, looking for a better ecosystem or a faster certification scheme, I think we should go one step further, okay? So, following the same approach than before, I think there are other areas not directly related to the testing that can be improved, or where we will apply different tools, like can be the documentation, reporting, or infrastructure. Let's see one by one, starting with the documentation. As you can see in the DTR, the ISO 24759 define almost 40% of vendor requirements. These are related to the documentation. At the same time, there are other documents that are always mandatory within a cryptographic module validation, like can be the security policy, the certificate that is released at the end, the FSM, the finite state model, or even the VE, the vendor evidence. If we had a template for all these documents in data interchange format, just like JSON or XML, this could be very useful, because we will have tools in order to check this document before starting the reviewing process. We could ensure that the level of information of this document is good enough for starting the reviewing, and we can avoid some kind of wasting time in the review process if the documentation is not ready to go ahead. Reporting, the standard define the same requirement for any kind of module or level of certification. But it doesn't clearly say how deep you should go in many cases, or the evidence that is expected. I think if we do an effort on that part, similar to what, if you are familiar with common criteria, and the NIA protection profile, in this kind of protection profile clearly tell you what is expected as an evidence, or as the result of the testing. So if all the labs we can use the same tools, we will obtain mostly the same report, and that will be easier for everybody, not only for the lab, but also for the reviewer to do the review process faster. Of course, the security communication infrastructure is quite important, not only to guarantee what is the confidentiality or the integrity of the information that is interchanged, that is assumed, but also the availability. That is something that sometimes is not it's not as important as it is. If we want to have a very good or quick certification process, it needs to be available 24/7. So there are many tools out there to create this, using PKI certificates, asset control system, but yeah, that is something that it can be improved. How we can bring trust? Well, here I have a couple of examples about how we can do that. First one will be using open source for the tools. The open source has many good qualities, like for example, the transparency. If the code is available, anyone can check it. Cost-effective for the for the companies. The budget is quite important, and these tools are usually free. A customization where you can get some code before starting from scratch and modify just to reach your goal. In fact, it is something that, for example, the Spanish CB has done with the button library. They have modified that library just to build the system they have for the validation of the algorithms, and this is a very good approach. Community support, and this is good for bringing the community working together, reaching the same goals. Also the security, if the code is there, anybody can audit, and we could guarantee that the code will be free of vulnerabilities. And finally, the educational value. This is also important. If you have the code, you can deeply understand how everything works, and this is always useful. But also another alternative could be creating powerful ecosystems. With a clear government structure, defining a clear roadmap with different milestones, short-term, mid-term, and long-term, trying to bring the whole community here, the key players, both in the different ways, the vendors, labs, governments, that it should have a competitive advantage. And right now, what the industry is demanding is to have a quick certification process. So that should be the best advantage that we should offer, with clear rule of the game, identifying what are the main role and what are the responsibilities and the engagement between them. But also, and I will say this, the most important, the scalability and resilience. The technology is always evolving, and everything happens. Something that we should prepare to give quickly an answer. I mean, for example, if you remember a couple of years ago, the SHA-3, this is a very well-known algorithm, had a vulnerability. Okay, at that moment, many schemes said what happened with the certification of the model that had this algorithm. That is something that the government structure should be prepared, because that will happen in the future. Another example would be the post-quantum algorithms. Right now, I think we are all aware that that is what will happen in the next year. So we should be ready to say what are the good algorithms, what are not, and the reason why. A few conclusions, personal conclusions, what I have repeated several times. It's clear that the industry requires quick certification programs, but also a common understanding between the government standard regulator should happen, because one of the problems that the industry had is that the vendor cannot develop different versions of the product to meet all the regulations. With the same products should be able to meet most of them. Okay, the basis for everything should be the tools as much as possible, and the automation process, because this will give us many good advantages, like the efficiency, quality, and consistency. We will increase the productivity and data analysis, and the availability that I had mentioned before. So as you can see, there is a lot of work that needs to be done, but well, here we are as DECRA, as part of this commitment to this may happen. Okay. So let's get started. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. A load of points and notes here from me on this one. First point, generally particularly for newcomers to this, we referred quite a few times to FIPS 140, the American scheme, and was sitting at -2 for quite some time. There was a lot of discussion around where it would go from there, and it took quite a long time to happen, but the -3 version of the American scheme for certifying cryptographic modules was effectively brought into line with 19790. So that standard forms the basis of the US certification scheme now. There are specific requirements, mostly around the detail of documentation level required, this kind of thing, but essentially the American scheme was brought into line with 19790, which also there was a slide from Luis and one from Roland as well, talking about some of the other global schemes, the national schemes around the world. And quite a few of them, be that ones in Japan, in Korea, Turkey, and I believe Spain, all have 19790 at the heart of them. So again, that's all part of the story of we've got the basics of a common approach here, and the more we set up our own borders to determine how we solve the same problem, the more complex we're making it for ourselves, and the easier we're making it for the bad guys. A couple of points, just picking up on Lewis as well. With the new version of the standard, as you said, the scope's actually getting bigger. And if we're trying to simplify things, oh my God, suddenly it becomes even more complicated. So that becomes a real driver for automation. But a really good point, it's not just about the testing and the test labs. This allows the manufacturer with that same test tool to pre-test, do a self-assessment, and help de-risk the whole process even more. So the value of these test tools is enormous in accelerating getting good products to market and de-risking it for everybody. You're making a comment about some of the crypto tools, and you had NIST and BSI. Just to clarify with everybody, that BSI is a different BSI to this BSI. So I'm part of British Standards Institution. The BSI, being the German security organization, is the organization collaborating with NIST around the crypto tools. So just to confuse people, they're two different BSIs. You're then making points around it's not just testing, documentation and reporting. It all makes sense here just to standardize. The trouble with this tends to be, where do we start? Who's actually going to say we'll do it this way and agree to it? And I think that'll be something for the panel discussion today, because it comes on to the last 2 points I'm picking up. Open source. We were talking about this in the cybersecurity session yesterday, the open source being something that's so valuable but has many risks to it. Open source here, I see as absolutely being critical to having a cost-effective, pragmatic solution. But some of the same challenges arise. Who's going to fund it? Who's going to support it? How can they be trusted, independent? So that then comes on to the final point I liked here around the ecosystem. So that's the way to end up with suitable governance over open source, that it can be trusted. And I think that, again, will come down to the labs quite a lot here. And what's great is we've got a panel session full of labs going to be sat up here in around half an hour. So I'll be giving them a hard time about why we all can't just get on and sort this issue out. So thanks, Luis, some really useful insight. And I think the pressure coming on now with more complications of the standard and the opportunities these tools can bring, we've got to stop talking about this and actually get on with it and sort it out. So that's going to be a real challenge to the panel session. Before we get on to that, our final keynote talk today will come from my BSI colleague, Mustamir, who is somewhere over the ether in the UK. Mustamir, are you with us?
Hello, I think I'm with you.
Hey, Mustamir, good to see you.
Thank you. So, without further ado, I shall commence. So my name is Mustamir, and I am the certification lead for BSI's own cybersecurity certification practice focused on certification of products. Unfortunately, I can't be there with you in Barcelona, so I'm speaking from not quite so sunny London. So next slide, please. So I think we've talked about this subject a lot already today, but just presenting maybe another sort of angle or view on the fundamental question of why are we doing this? Why are we pursuing maybe another 19790 certification approach? And I think it goes without saying that we all understand here that cryptographic modules are really the core of many security solutions and many security systems. It's if you have a security system, it is only as strong as the sort of the weakest link, the thing at the core. So if we cannot trust in the security of the cryptographic module that sits at the heart of the module or of the security system, then can we trust the security system and the function as a whole? So there is a need to establish that trust, and there are effectively two key approaches here. The solution builders, the people producing these cryptographic modules, these vendors or product developers, they need a way to select a module that provides an appropriate security for their application. As we've seen in a previous presentation, there are many use cases and applications of cryptographic modules. So being able to understand which modules provide an appropriate level of security for that application is important, so that solution builders can select the right module that's appropriate in terms of cost, in terms of functions, in terms of providing the security without going necessarily overboard. Or if it doesn't provide the right level of security, they need to know that so that they can build their solutions accordingly. The security requirements of, say, a medical device may be very different to the security requirements of a military-grade device, or for that matter, consumer products that also transact data and have security needs. So understanding that there are different levels of security required and having a simple way of for vendors of cryptographic modules to communicate that to the solution builders is important. And similarly, the solution builders need to be able to trust that the security level provided or claimed by the module that they're using is true. Can they be sure that they are purchasing or implementing a cryptographic module that provides the level of security that it claims? So it's very important here that the builders, the users of these cryptographic modules, can understand and trust in these cryptographic modules. And 19790 standard provides a framework for that with its security levels. Next slide, please. So we've heard from testing laboratories, and we all understand that testing is the fundamental activity to determine, does a cryptographic module comply with the requirements of, say, the 19790 standard, or indeed a broader scheme. So test laboratories are critical here. They're doing, I dare say, the hard work in any sort of scheme in terms of determining fundamentally, does the cryptographic module meet the requirements of the standard at the security level that it claims? But we have to understand that testing is effectively a one-off activity. It's the test report is understood to be valid for the item tested at the time of test under the conditions of test at that point in time. So a test report and testing activity is very much a slice in time that says that at some point the design of the product, in this case a cryptographic module, did meet the requirements, and we understand that because we've seen an example of it doing so. Certification then adds effectively a layer of broader understanding as to the scope of conformity here. So certification, to use a language of the 17065 standard that I will talk about more in this presentation, is an attestation of conformity to particular requirements. So the certification is a very simple document, and it does not contain detail of specific test cases or results. So whereas a test laboratory report is usually quite detailed and maybe contains a lot more information than that a vendor would like to make available to their customers and to solution builders, a certificate summarizes that information in a very simple, digestible manner that reveals what it needs to reveal and keeps the important or the information that is let's say less desirable to put into the public domain in the right place. So it may not contain as much specific detail, but it must contain enough and enough information to be usable. And it is considered to be valid more broadly than a test report. And later on, we'll talk about sort of advances in certification schemes that add a greater degree of timeliness to the certification and what it covers. And finally, the process of 17065, the certification standard, adds an additional layer of impartiality and trust. There's another party involved. So now you have more people at the table supporting the claim of conformity. It goes from a manufacturer makes the initial claim that is backed up or proven by testing, and then certification is another party. So you now have effectively three parties behind any certification claiming conformity. So it builds a very strong foundation for trust. Moving on. So a certificate is a very simple document, and the rules of how a certificate is achieved and maintained is called a certification scheme. So we've talked about certification schemes today, and will continue today. So just to understand that it is effectively a rule set that explains how does a product or organization, how do we achieve certification? And then how do we retain it and maintain it? For a simple scheme, the input to certification is the test report. And a very simple scheme can effectively take a test report and turn it into a certificate without a lot of additional input or work. Although we have to be careful here that according to the 17065 approach that I'm describing today, certification has to be more than just a rubber stamping exercise. There's no value or not as much value if the certification body is doing little more than just taking a test report and issuing a certificate that is a summary of the same test report. So there is a bit more going on. But more complex schemes may have additional inputs, further technical documentation, security risk assessments related to the products being certified. They may look at assessment reports and surveillance of critical sites responsible for the design, development, maintenance, and rollout and support of the products. So a scheme can go broader than simply attesting conformity based on a simple input as a test report. Next slide, please. So where are we today? So BSI is certifying cryptographic modules against ISO 19790. We are using a very simple approach at this point, a type 1A scheme. So there are many models for certification schemes in the ISO 17067 standard. So I've got lots of ISO standards being thrown around today. 17065 defines different types of certification schemes. Type 1A is the simplest, and it goes up to type 5, which is the most complex. And as they increase in complexity, so they increase in the degree of effectively surveillance that goes into maintaining the certification. So at this point in time, we've gone for the simplest approach, which is type 1A. It is effectively a simple statement of conformity based on testing. Using the 19790 standard, that common standard now that underpins many national schemes, and by certifying to the effectively common denominator, that gives us a flexible certification that can be used quite broadly, and as we are discussing today and later on in our panel. So the scheme is also is undergoing accreditation with the UK National Accreditation Body, and an accreditation of any certification scheme is important, as it again adds a layer of trust and impartiality and backing that the scheme does indeed comply with the 17065 approach, and 17065 is the model for globally adopted model for certification schemes. So the current scheme, which is a type 1A, has effectively two inputs. The first is the test report, which comes from laboratories following ISO 17025, 17025 being the standard that establishes normal common practice for testing laboratories. And we also look at the cryptographic module security policy. This is a document required by the 19790 standard, and that is looked at independently as part of the certification work. Next slide, please. So far, we have actually issued 8 certificates to 4 different organizations who have achieved certification for their cryptographic modules. And it covers a variety of modules from hardware, software, and hybrid modules at a variety of security levels. And for these, we have partnered with 3 testing laboratories, whose names on the screen, all of whom have demonstrated the ability to test the cryptographic module to the 19790 standard and input to certification. So we're building an ecosystem and a community of partners who we've worked together to certify cryptographic modules. And as this work continues, we hope that this community will grow, and that will lend strength to the work that we are doing. Next slide, please. So the process here that I will define or describe is effectively an implementation of the process that ISO 17065 details. So there are 3 parties effectively involved. There is the applicant, that's effectively the designer, developer, the vendor of a cryptographic module. Then there's the evaluator, or we can read that as a test laboratory, and then there's a certification body. So these are the 3 parties that form a certification process. And these are 3 independent parties, and it's very critical that they are independent of each other so that we avoid bias and conflicts of interest in terms of one party having a vested interest in achieving a certain outcome. So each party is independent in their evaluation and statements of conformity for the cryptographic module. So the process starts with the applicant, the vendor, the owner of the cryptographic module, effectively asking for certification. And they will make an application to the certification body, telling the certification body what they want certified, what are the criteria, what is the security level, what are the parameters here, what is the output that they ultimately want to achieve. So this then is passed to the certification body, will receive this application, and 17065 is very explicit that the certification body has to do effectively a review of the application. Application review is a process of determining capability, how we'll go about certifying the product, so effectively drawing up an evaluation plan. What evidence does the certification body need in order to be able to attest conformity as requested by the applicant? That there are also, of course, commercial terms to be resolved at this stage. And once everything is agreed that the applicant is happy with the certification body's approach, then the evaluator can actually conduct the physical testing and evaluation of the cryptographic module. In this case, according to the ISO 24759 standard that we heard about in the previous presentation, this establishes the common test approach and methodology for a cryptographic module, so that we can reach the understanding, an acceptable understanding, that the cryptographic module does indeed hopefully meets the requirements of the 19790 standard for the target security level, or if not, for the security level that is achieved. So the applicant will receive the test report back from the laboratory, hopefully with a positive verdict, stating that the cryptographic module does indeed achieve the security level based on the 19790 standard, and will then supply that together with the security policy that was provided to the laboratory, of course, and any other relevant evidence to the certification body. That will conduct a technical review. And the technical review is a very important step by the certification body. This is where, as I say, certification is more than just rubber stamping. So the certification body will have its own technical expertise to review the test report, to review the security policy, and any technical details about the cryptographic module, to make sure it all lines up, to make sure it is logical and correct. Nothing has changed in the process between the applicant making the application, the test report being issued, and the evidence being supplied to the certification body, understanding that there could indeed be time lapses between the activities happening. It could be possible that the test report for the cryptographic module was generated prior to the application being made. So the certification body needs to be sure that the test report is still valid and is still logical and correct for the module as presented at the point of certification. And finally, when all the evidence has been reviewed and everything is okay, it lines up and is logical, the certificate can be drafted and issued according to the initial application and the statement of conformity is made. So the content of the certificate for this scheme is sort of, we've kept it to sort of the minimum necessary information. So it has to be very clear what was certified. So the module, the version identifier, the form of the module, and we may have to define the cryptographic boundaries, but ultimately there is a clear statement of what is certified and the security level that it has achieved. Going back to our initial need here, that solution builders need to be able to select appropriate security cryptographic modules. The security level is an important statement on the certificate. The cryptographic mechanisms themselves are actually covered because the module, again, will have a specific function, and stating the mechanisms allows solution builders to select modules accordingly, and any important caveats or comments that may apply. For example, let's say there's an external entropy source is required, and therefore any limitations or requirements around that to actually give us the valid cryptographic module that achieves the security level should be stated on the certificate. Next slide, please. So maintaining the certificate over time, we've said the certificate is valid for 3 years in the previous slide. So there may be changes to the cryptographic module during that time. And we understand that if there are changes with very little impact or no impact to the compliance with the security level and effectively administrative changes, these can indeed be updated. The certificate can be updated with little or no effort and maybe no involvement from an evaluator. However, as the changes become more complex, for example, a publicly known vulnerability becomes available, then there may be a need to reissue the certificate referencing the new module version, and this may indeed require evaluation, a re-evaluation of the cryptographic module, and the certification body will work with evaluators to produce an appropriate test plan that covers the changes to the cryptographic module in this process. And finally, if there are major changes to the cryptographic module, maybe a change, addition of new algorithms or modification of the access control mechanisms, a new certificate may be issued. This may be too big a change for an existing certificate and may require full retesting by an evaluator to enable certificate to remain valid. And finally, what are the next steps? And the next steps are things that we're talking about today. So the scheme will need to expand. We need to look at things like surveillance rules. At the moment, the certificate takes the test report and issues an attestation of conformity. But what happens if we introduce surveillance? That allows us to certify based on changing state in time. So, for example, if new publicly known vulnerabilities become known, how does the cryptographic module vendor deal with those? And how do we address their handling of that? And indeed, any non-conformities that arise during the surveillance process. Algorithm conformance testing is a subject that needs to be discussed. At the moment, we're focused very much on the security levels, but not so much on the functionality of the cryptographic modules. But this is also important. And of course, as the previous presentation spoke in great detail, common testing tools. We need an approach to agree testing tools, but within the ecosystem, within the various players in the community, so that we have a common approach to the testing tools that are acceptable for the testing laboratories, for the certification bodies, for the vendors, and ultimately for the users of cryptographic modules. So as I think that the conclusion from the previous presentation sort of said, and I will agree, there's a lot of work to do. We've got so far, there's a lot more work to do, and we'll continue doing that work. We'll continue promoting this initiative through these events and developing the scheme to address the needs of the community. And with that, I will hand back to David.
Thank you, Mr. Neer. And yeah, some good points, a couple of important things to pick out there. When we're talking about going through an accreditation process, either for the lab or for the certification body, the accreditation bodies themselves need to build up the capability to actually accredit. And so one of the issues that's slowing us down a little bit at the moment is the accreditation body getting the skill sets together to be able to perform an effective accreditation for us. And that's some of the challenges for the test lab. When you look at a national specific scheme, such as NIST, NIST then has the organization to actually approve specific labs themselves and just manage that themselves. One of the processes we're going through to make a more generic approach is to build up the capabilities within the accreditation bodies that allows the labs and the certification bodies to achieve their own accreditation, which is why some of these things take time. A couple of the other points, I mean, Mustanir mentioned that the labs have to have 17025, an ISO number for the lab accreditation. But the key point here is it has to have this standard within the scope. And this is where, again, the complexities are. Now, quite a few of the labs that will be involved in the panel discussion today are already accredited by NIST, for instance, for FIPS 140. So it becomes relatively straightforward for them to be accredited to 19790. They just need the accreditation bodies to be able to do the job. So that's one of the challenges we'll pick up on later. So we've heard, starting off with Roland really, there are loads of opportunities for us to be going after with this scheme, from medical devices through to the fintech sector. So what we're going to be talking about in the panel discussion is really how to break this down and find one or two particular use cases that we can really start to move with this. We heard from Luis around the test tools. And though the panel guys, I didn't put that in my briefing notes, I'm going to give you some questions on this test tools and how we can better work together. So that's one extra question that's coming into the panel session. And then finally from Mustanir, this scheme is live, it's now happening. And the first phase is there with the simple certification process. As you can see, that requires a review every time there's a fundamental change. As we move and that process matures and we develop to what was called a Type 5 process, we'll also be doing that ongoing surveillance. So there's work to do there, but we're already at the point now where certificates are being issued and we're building trust. So there's a lot to discuss in a panel session, which is always the kind of liveliest bit of this event. So I'm looking forward to a lively discussion. We're going to take a short break now, and just for those in the room, we're going to have, as ever, a fancy team photo in front of the background. So those of you online, if you could bear with us for 20 minutes or so, we're going to be just, yes, having a nice little team photo, and then really discussing some of the issues and preparing for what will be, I'm sure, a very interesting panel debate, and we'll speak to you soon. Thank you. Okay, everyone. So we're going to start a few minutes early because it does look like we've got quite a lot to discuss. So if I could ask the panelists to join us, we're going to start a few minutes early, hopefully maximize the time for discussion and hopefully some Q&A from the floor as well. We'll start with some introductions from those. He's coming, great. We'll start from introductions for those we haven't heard from yet today. So I'm going to start off with Miguel, a regular at these events, and very pleased to have you join us for the panel session today. Would you mind giving me a quick introduction to yourself?
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me here, for inviting me here. I'm a regular. I'm hooked on this topic. In fact, I'm convener of the working group in ISO who develops the standard. So happy to see how this is evolving and how this is being applied. So for me, this is the perfect picture of the results of our work. So thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. Next, Emmanuel, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to the audience.
Yeah, so I'm Emmanuel Marie. I'm part of the SAMA Safety and Security Laboratory, and I'm involved in business development for VLab. Yeah.
Thank you. And Luis, we've heard from. It's all right, we've heard from Luis, you know who he is. So Jay, over to you if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Okay, my name is Jay Yang, and I'm from Streamline Group. That's a company already 151 years old. So we are in the testing and the certification business for a very, very long time and experienced so many different aspects from scratch to testing, certification available. Yeah.
Thanks. And Sergio?
Thank you. Okay, my name is Sergi Casanova. I'm responsible of the security laboratory for SGS Brightsight in Spain and France. And yeah, we basically do assessment of all these standards that all of these gentlemen have been talking about.
Thank you. And Roland, we've heard from?
Yes, Roland Natry. I'm managing director at Red Alert Labs. I also have a lot of involvements in the EU on defining the different certification schemes, regulations, cybersecurity standards. Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. You're saying you're happy to be here. We were putting that challenge out earlier. Why don't the labs all get together to sort out about common test tools and a common approach? They're all sat here now, so I can just point my finger at them and say, what do we need to do to get together? So we will come on to that as one of the key questions, I think, from today. But I'd like to start with Miguel as convener of the working group for the standard, and you've been obviously in a few of these events before. Any thoughts and reflections on what you've heard so far today?
You summarize at the beginning of the sessions the evolution of this meeting, which is quite astonishing in the sense of how much these discussions have evolved and how much activity they are bringing behind. Because we are now, as I can see on the discussion, we are now discussing about tools, about things that some time ago, not so long ago, were just clouds on there. And by the way, I can give you some breaking news, some exclusive news on the revision of the standard.
Exclusive breaking news, everybody.
Especially to support automation. So, as you said, 1.7.0 is now under revision. So there is a high probability that this revision comes with the standard, both 1.7.0 and 24759, structured in XML for the use of vendors and test labs. So we have been, I've been working like crazy, providing the model and all those things. I love programming, and hopefully we can make it. And that will provide the stakeholders the capability to build upon the standard, to build tools, to build processes, to build... in S27 Working Group 3, we have a very strong policy towards automation. And following the example of the Common Criteria 1548, which we have also modeled in XML for the stakeholders to use that, we are heavily working there. So there is a high degree, if things go well, that labs, CVs, they can import in machine-readable format the content, and then work on all these tools, automating tests and designing the... So that's breaking news. It's not yet decided because we have to see the final result, but we are heavily working there. So
that's really good. I mean, and for my BSI colleagues in the room and online, be aware that within BSI, there's a huge focus right now on smart machine-readable standards, this kind of thing then as well, this whole approach. Yeah. So that's really great to see. And I know obviously he says not 100% confirmed. Breaking news almost, but not 100% confirmed.
Well, the news is that there is a high probability.
Okay.
You know,
that's the news. Okay. So that really is good news, and certainly it's something I'd like to pick up with you on and see the work going on behind that and use that as part of maybe some of the case study work we're looking at about how in the real world this machine readable can really make approach can make a benefit. Yeah. So very good news. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
And next I really want to go back to Roland. So you showed a whole plethora of fantastic opportunities for cryptographic modules and for this scheme to help build trust. So many of them. But each, I presume, has got its own challenges. What are your thoughts on where potentially would be that mixture of industry need, potentially where security is important enough that some kind of high level of cryptographic module is needed, but we're not necessarily talking about national security, which would then bring in, oh, it's going to have to be a national policy. So that's the kind of sweet spot we're looking for. Any thoughts from you on where potential market sectors from the ones you listed, maybe a good start point?
Yeah, sure. So of course, the idea from what I presented is really to be able to have first somehow a panorama of the existing and to reflect on indeed all this and potentially look into opportunities to navigate between the different market requirements. So you mentioned it. So it comes from first criteria, which is a market need, right? So if I would like to answer your questions, I would like first to probably agree on what are the criteria we would like to select to be able to say this is the market that we should start with, or probably this is the area we would like to explore. So if we, for example, think that first, let's look into areas where certification would be needed, right? Which means areas where the risk, the sensitivity of the information, of the data, of the assets makes sense for bringing, or let's say looking into trust and to manage the risk according to that level of trust. So that will really somehow preclude many industries that actually potentially would not look into what we call certificate today, or potentially would be looking into it later on. So that's one of the first criteria. The second criteria would be potentially the areas that are going into regulation, so it will become more and more regulated, not necessarily on the national level, and some that actually would involve definitely industrial and would have industrial implications. So I would look definitely into those that actually will be the most first to be regulated. So the medical domain, the automotive industry. I've looked into the RED directive, which is a bit across somehow domains. It's interesting how the impact would be actually on the future industry. And the third criteria would be like, okay, looking into all this, I've put some of the standards and scheme that potentially are used, and you can notice in some areas we do not look into the product, we don't look into the crypto module, we look into the system level, the information security, and I think that's an area potentially to explore more, because we need to bring that new value where through that certification scheme to manage the gap, to address the gap that exists. So if you could put those three criterias, I would expect actually the answer would be, let's take it step by step with those that actually that meets those criteria. And I think by the end, all what I've shown are really areas to explore, and it's all about prioritization.
Right, you can see why Roland's a good panelist, because as a panelist he knows to challenge back the question master rather than answer the question himself. So very smart bit of play from Roland there. But no, it is a very good point. And when you're talking about regulation, and that regulation focusing maybe at the product level or the system level, this is where I think the supply chain conversation comes in about then, is part of the thing here is engaging with those. If the regulation compliance falls on them at the system level, what are they doing to check through their supply chain to build trust in that supply chain? So it may not be a direct single step then from the regulation to this, but it becomes a step through the integrator through to that. This is a critical component. So maybe that becomes part of the route forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we spoke about creating incentive and definitely motivation, and of course regulation will, for example, if we look into NIS2, for example, will require those companies that actually falls into NIS2 to impose requirements to their suppliers, and those requirements are still not clear on all the different types of products and taxonomy of, and definitely they will be looking into certifications, starting from common criteria, of course, and other different types of certification addressing cryptographic module. So that one example, and other examples are from our domain that we see on a daily basis is really in IoT, where different components navigating from different steps of the development life cycle to end up in a product by the end. The CRA, for example, is going to impose actually, of course, a sort of iterative approach to push requirements on the suppliers and be able to validate, to minimize the risk, to manage the risk better on the end usage and for final product level.
Yeah, so, thanks. A couple of abbreviations there just for the whole audience. NIS2, Network and Information System Directive, which has been expanded to cover a wider range of applications and will be very, very relevant, has 10 basic broad requirements in that. And overall gets quite a bit of criticism, but overall I'm kind of very supportive. I like that broad approach. But the trouble with being a broad approach is, what does that implementation really look like? And I think that will be something, again, as you kind of drill down from that, where this might be 2 layers below maybe a requirement for it. And then CRA, Cyber Resilience Act, that's going to be more product focused and looking at security by design within products. I think that, again, will be something that starts at the top there, but this will kind of cascade down to be a requirement. So thank you. Emmanuel, if I can just ask you what are you seeing from the market perspective in terms of potential demand here, listening to Roland saying, again, there's that broad to explore. Are there particular either industry sectors or geographies you think that would be more open to this than others?
Yeah. From a geography point of view, we see a real interest from the Asia market and the emerging country. Maybe because they want to follow an international scheme and not a specific national scheme. Even if FIPS, it's not really a national one, but it's managed by the NIST. So maybe they want more, an ISO one, it's more independent. And also maybe some developers are afraid about the Q reports from the FIPS, as we said a few minutes ago. Q reports, it's quite 1 year or maybe more. So it can be quite afraid for that. So that's why we need to be ready also for if the number of certificates increase for the ISO, we need to be ready with automatic tools and so on, and to reduce the reviews.
That's a really good point, actually. One of the concepts, going back, Miguel, to the very first meeting we had in here 2 years ago, was one of the aims here is to have a relatively fast, responsive scheme and ecosystem. So the last thing we want to do is go and announce to the world we can do this and not have everything in place. So I think that's a really, really good point. And I certainly wouldn't want to pitch what we're doing as being an alternative to NIST FIPS 140 per se, because I think that has its needs, absolutely. But I think what we are trying to do is have a framework that is more open and accessible, that still builds the same level of trust in the product, but has that global geographical spread in terms of governance, ownership, and management, and is that more open ecosystem. So from that perspective, I can see what you're saying, Emmanuel, that maybe areas in Asia Pacific and Middle East in particular, but we've certainly seen interest globally. But I think one of the things, if I want to stop this becoming a really good chat with a load of friends around the table here, is we've got to nail this down to where we're going to start. I think that's one of the things that we're really going to come onto here. So we're going to start where the need is perceived to be the greatest, and there is a willingness to move. Now, this isn't the first time in the history of the universe that there's been a great idea and we're trying to bring this to the market around standards and certifications. So maybe, Jay, with the 150 years experience of TÜV, I'm sure you weren't there for all 150 of them, but for your experience within TÜV, where have you seen this kind of thing before, where there's a solution, it's solving a real problem, but you need to kind of grow by steps into the market, and how you've seen this actually take shape before that maybe we could all learn from?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of histories of the regulation, right? And basically, normally, I think the industry, they will start a business first, and when there is some issues there, and then it bring back to the regulators and to accreditation bodies, and then to think we may need to add something in. And I think we see, even from the long history, product safety, and we see that start with different standards on different product category, and then back to accreditation bodies, they also need to have the same level of understanding the industry, the products, and then to the regulators. So from our experience, I think normally the regulators will first initiate some idea there, and then the standardizations will bring into the brilliant ideas from standardization point of view. And in the end, the accreditation bodies should have certain level of understanding, then to certification body, to testing lab. And I think right now, from this morning's discussion, we can have certain understanding is we have very good lab, we have very good certification body, we have very good working group already tackled this and with very fruitful know-how. However, my question will be that how the regulators and accreditation bodies, their know-how level, and is this also already transparent enough to really put everybody on the same page? And this is something I think we could bring this question with us and to go back to work and to see how we can enhance a better transparency among all the stakeholders. And on the other hand, I also like what Ronan said, different ecosystem may have different level of demand. And for us, we need to consider which, we need to consider priority, you know. So which sectors is the first one we should step in? And I think all the histories already tells us the one close to the user or the one very with most pain points right now is a better entry point for us. And I believe we are ready from technical point, but from the market point, geographically, just now we mentioned which market may have the chance, but from industry sectors, which sectors would have the best entry point for us? I think this is also something we could learn from the history and to choose the right spot to cut in. And I believe that we know NIST, FIPS are already very well known. However, I think from the industry sectors, they would have clear demand to have different options based on different reasons, right? And right now we are right here to try to build the another option. And this need time because just as said, a lot of stakeholders are still not on the boat yet. But if we overcome all the challenges and we found the right spots to really cut in, the message will spread out very quick. And then the other industry sectors will also not like passively waiting there. They will also engage proactively. That's something I would like to share.
Yeah, thank you. And I suppose it's partly my own, I say my own fault, but believing in this, seeing the benefits that it brings and pushing this almost as a voluntary, you need to do this because it's best for you, it's best for your customer. But ultimately what you're saying is unless really it's tied into some kind of regulation that's forcing people to look at this, is it really going to gain traction? I think that's a really good point. I think maybe we can look at that softer style of regulation in the EU and tie things back. I mean, things that strike me are things like medical device, which is actually quite, you know, it's quite detailed in what's actually needed, but a lot of it says using industry best practice rather than actually saying specifically what the standards are. So for me, maybe these are the kind of things where we know there's a massive opportunity around digital healthcare and digitizing medical devices, but a huge amount of risk. So maybe that, where you've already got some regulation there, which also then looks to other technologies. So for instance, AI just coming into the medical device area now, and how the AI regulation and then MDR regulation, and you've got an intersection there of technology and the vertical, and maybe we can look to use that kind of an example. I think that's a very, very good point. Unless we get that full ecosystem, including a regulator, fully on board with this, it's going to still be difficult pushing this as something that's nice to do rather than something you have to do. Yep. So, yeah, very, very good point. Miguel, I saw you twitching there a little bit almost with something. I don't know, is that something from the working group when you're actually putting the standard out there in terms of how you see it would support this kind of thing and regulation? Any thoughts from your side then? You know, because obviously you created the standard for a reason. You're looking there to be adopted. What are your thoughts then on that engagement with regulators?
Well, the process is not so well designed. I mean, it's more receiving the request from the market and responding to that. And then it's an open process. So you just put the boat on the river and let it go. So as we go through the river, the different contributors move to one side or the other, and we don't know where we will be finishing. But that's part of the beauty of the thing, which is, at the end of the day, the end result is the full agreement and consensus-driven destination. So you know when you start, you don't know where you are going to finish. The only thing you know is that wherever we go, it's based on agreement, mostly from the market. So the version we had last year, the version we are going to finish this year, they just represent the best practice and the state-of-the-art knowledge in these topics. And in ISO, we develop the standards, which are voluntary. We don't go into the schemes. That is left for the market to be designed and set up on themselves. So we throw in the stone and we hide the hand.
And I suppose, again, it's me. I'm on that river, but I'm in a speedboat going, put it to the max like this, trying to get to the destination, and probably need to back off the throttle a little bit and making sure we're bringing everyone with us. I think that's probably part of the issue here.
The timing, playing with the timing is as important as playing with the content. So you cannot arrive to the moon too soon if there is nobody there. Yeah.
Yeah, very good point. And so, if, Jay, what we're saying is we need to bring, that whole ecosystem, including the regulators, along with us. What I want to do is maybe get a few target first places we're going to look. And I think for me, MDR is one. I think the medical devices, and maybe then it'd be interesting to explore looking at the RED directive and now a reference there through the standards down to 19790s. Maybe there's a few things we can start to really focus this on real opportunities. Because as I said, the top level, governments say, that's a brilliant idea. Industry says, great idea. Less hassle, less certification. But when we come to actually do it, suddenly nobody knows where to move forward. One other point, again, for the whole audience here, there was a perception, I think, around this streamlining of certification that says there's a vested interest in this community not sorting this out. At the moment, if there's different certifications and testing needing for every country, then for all the test labs and certification bodies, brilliant, bring it on, because that's more business for us, hurrah. So this is why, for me, it's fantastic to see a unified front here from test labs, certification bodies, to say, we are prepared to streamline this and make it easier for you, industry, and for you, government, to actually work with these products and bring trust. So we're all willing to do it. I think this is really just looking at the audience here, that really brings that home today. Okay, let's say we do this. We're moving ahead now with medical devices. Okay, great, we're going to go. The next step, we kind of hinted this already, is how do we engage with the market in a way that we don't end up in the same mess that to a certain extent we're in now? So Sergio, from your perspective, looking at how to engage with industry on this, how do we strike that balance? What have we got to consider in terms of test labs, certification bodies when we go into that market to actually make sure that we can actually deliver?
Okay, so for a lab, the important part here is to have a clear standard that we can follow, that is strict and it's easy to understand also for the developers. But what I miss here is the value that the industry can get from that. So we talk about the specific module, and okay, after when we have a specific module, going forward to get this value for the specific vertical, for the specific market, to say, okay, this is what we can do after this specific process. This is what it's needed for going in the next step. Also, we hear about open source and trust, but we also need to have trust on the labs. Labs, I mean, we are labs here, and we need to clearly show that we are capable of providing this value and this trust, saying, okay, whatever we do, it's specifically what is required by the standard and also by the market. If not, we are ending up on the boat crashing in some side of the river, right? So this is my view here.
Yeah, so the first point around the value, I think that's where, going back to what Jay was saying around working with the regulators, so there is both the direct market access value as well as the, ultimately, what Roland said right at the beginning, this is actually making things more secure. This is actually doing the right thing. But unfortunately, just saying this is doing the right thing isn't enough, and we need to have the boot as well as the carrot and the stick. So I think the regulator part will be part of that, and I think the overall value part we can articulate very well, but then it's where's the real push from a regulator, and tying it into a regulation I think will help with that. So going on to the next point around trust in the labs, and this I think goes back to accreditation, but then also making sure that the accreditors themselves are on board with the skill sets and the understanding. So this goes back again to that community thing here. So a positive engagement with accreditation and making sure there's a common knowledge and understanding, common skills, common knowledge and understanding around that. I mean, it's all very well to say, well, the lab needs to be 17025 accredited with the particular standard in its scope. But as we found out, the accreditation bodies, this is something, wow, it's way out of their comfort zone. So unless we bring them along with us, I'm already seeing this with AI, for instance, as well, on another topic, where, again, we're all pushing and good to go, wanting to go for accreditation, but the accreditation bodies have got a heck of a lot of work to do to make sure they are in a suitable position to sign off, to say this particular certification body can be trusted. So I think that part, the accreditation bodies being on side, will help them with the credibility of the 17025 lab environment. And then there are other things, again, across the labs, potentially with the kind of round-robin testing and checking we're getting kind of common results. And maybe this is where, again, that community can work a little bit more proactively than purely 17025 to really make sure then we start to build trust. As I said, the fact that you're all sat here today talking about how to simplify and reduce the amount of testing and certification that overall is needed shows that we're all willing to work together here for the better good. So finding ways of sharing and collaborating, I think, are really, really key. And so the other point of that was around test tools. So, Luis, you did a great presentation there around the benefits of what can be done, whether it's how to govern open source, how to manage that effectively, and the ecosystem. What are your thoughts on, okay, you can say the labs now need to all get together, industry needs to get together. What's needed from your perspective to govern, say, an open source environment? Never mind how industry does it. What would you say would be good? What would good look like, and how to actually bring that to life?
Okay. Well, I think there are many things that can be improved, starting from the labs. But one of the things that you have mentioned, I think, is important to be accredited. That is one of the baseline that we should all meet. In fact, especially in the labs that has a bigger track record. No? But I think we should put the focus in all the different areas, also in the vendor part, because what we have seen as a lab is that sometimes the vendor has without knowledge at all about how is the certification process, what are the requirements involved. So some kind of training or testing tool that we can provide them, that thing that will be very useful and could speed up the certification process. For sure, what Miguel has mentioned, the ISO provides the standard, but later the scheme is far away to be created, and there is a lot of work until reaching that, because I believe we all have a clear understanding about when we should go, what is our goals, but I think we are far away to reach that goal, and we should start working on that, having a clear government structure with people involved about the whole community, very talented people that is out there. We should come here, and I think that will be the follow to be.
Yeah. So it's good. We kind of talk about it. We know it's the right thing to do, and it's just, I suppose, if we've got the commitment of this group here right now, then that is a critical mass to actually do it and make it happen. So maybe that's something, you know, as an action I can take offline here and pick up with each of you and just say, okay, we all can see this is a good idea, and let's just start doing it, forcing it to happen, and see what needs to be put in place. How can we protect our individual intellectual property and business, yet still collaborate together effectively for the common good of the industry, for the common good of wider society here? This is something that's really, really key. So that's probably the challenge question that we can take away, how it's going to work commercially. Can see how it's going to work technically, but how it's going to work commercially amongst us all to really, really make that happen. And Jay, perhaps I could come back to you again, because similar, like this isn't the first time it's ever happened. What's your previous experience then of how the community potentially gets together around something like this to actually collaborate while still mindful of individual business objectives, intellectual property, and this kind of thing then as well? Any examples previously where this kind of thing, you know, or what's needed to make this happen?
You mean to make the tools?
Well, not so much a specific tool, but collectively a group then of labs, tech companies, you know, potentially getting together and actually saying, okay, we'll open up here as much as we need to collaborate, but still protecting our own individual property.
Exactly. I mean, no one wants to be open proactively, actually. And for us as the tech sector, I think every time when we have to be open and to collaborate with each other, it's always pushed by the business. I mean, from the industry. The industry pushes us to do so. And there is a question for us is that do we really understand the current pain points from the industry side? That do we really care about that? As tech company, we always will speak for ourselves that we are always care about the industry, our partners, our customers, but we really understand. I mean, if we really understand, we understand right now the multiple regulations in different countries will bring a lot of headaches to the industry players. And then if we really care about this, and we should be already open, right? And we should sit together to see, is there really a unified methods from the standard itself to the tools and to the follow-up procedures, certification procedures. I believe it's easy, but how to follow up that, and I mean, this is all we can discuss, see together. And of course, different players will have different advantages that historically come from, and what you are good, what you are not good, and then we really sit together to say, let's work together to bring the best from each other and to get a really satisfaction from the industry, and they will feedback. Like Miguel said, we are on the same boat, but who is the water to flow the boat? I think it's the industry, it's the business, and not the regulators. I think the regulators would like to see the boat sailing very well. They would like to see more and more waters get into the river. And that's what regulation or governments, they hope. And I think the water is the most important. Yeah.
That's a great analogy. And I think that's probably where we'll look to kind of wrap this up. So we're back on that river. We need more water in the river. We need one boat where we're all rowing the same way. And I need to take my hand off the throttle of the speedboat and make sure we're going at a sensible pace. But I think what you're saying is this has got to come back to being driven by the industry need. And this is where, to a certain extent, we've gone round in circles, because there's a general commitment from industry to say, yes, we need this, but it's not until we bring it down to, okay, which one of you specifically needs it to do what? So it's moving beyond the general hypothetical industry need to saying, this industry needs this for this reason. And then there's a problem. Everyone focuses. We all come together and can see there is benefit, business-wise, in collaboration. And so that, I think, will be the aim. So I probably want to go around each one of you now to just, if there's one point from your perspective from what you've heard today, with that goal of we're going to find that first solution and then we're going to grow this and really make this happen. What's the one point you would like to just reinforce? Maybe something you said already, but your chance again for a final word on this before we close the panel session. And maybe if I start at that end and work our way along, Roland, thank you for your contribution initially with that great presentation and what you've heard now. What would you say, the one final comment from you on where to go from here?
Thank you as well, David, for this great leadership in getting actually this discussion, because it's so important and complex as well at the same time. If I had to say one thing, I think it's important to understand the mindset of the market needs, okay? In certification, we always confuse somehow what are the benefits and the value behind what we are bringing, and we sort of try to match them with things that we understand in business, like return on investment and all this stuff. So the question that we should always put in mind to reverse the thing that we ask usually from the markets, what is your needs and what are the benefits if you get certification? To another question, what are you losing if you're not getting certified? What are the things that actually you really lose? Is it something related to your risk management approach? Are you using markets? Are you putting yourself at risk? So if you just turn that question and you put it really in different industry, you get better actually to respond exactly their needs. And I would say this is a really important thing to actually take away from.
Really interesting, Roland. I mean, me personally, I always tend to focus on the positives. These are the benefits, the reasons why. So a really interesting concept to turn that on its head. And yeah, okay. That's one for me personally to kind of take away and reflect that on how I approach trying to kick the door down on a new industry that I know needs this, but they won't listen. So that's a really interesting point. Sergio, from an SGS perspective then.
Okay, so for me, yeah, I think obviously we are in a good situation for this move to the light of the information that we saw here, and we all know for the FIPS backlog and timings and everything. So what I think it's important here is to try to reduce a bit on the range and look for specifically need on the industry to try to start filling up that river, following the analogy that it seems that is from today's panel. So yeah, this is the key here. Look, try to reduce, not focus on everything. Try to reduce and take that specific vertical that will give this push to the standard.
Right. So again, focus on where that real need is strongest. Thank you, Jay. I mean, you've already elocuted so well. Final comment from you to Rhineland perspective.
Yeah, but I think all we hear that should become the ambassador of the 19790, and to one side talk with our business partners, talk with our industry players, that to tell them that why this is important. On the other hand, that we should always be together with the industry to win the trust from the government, from the regulators, to let them relax, let them don't be panic, and we take care of everything. And we are just, as tech player, we are just in the middle. So I think to be as an ambassador, to really bring the trust, to build the trust together with the industry and surrounding the trust, that's the most important thing we have to work together. Yeah.
Right. That message is definitely stronger together, isn't it, than individually? I think that's a really, really good point. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And Luis, obviously, you've really laid out the path there for how we should be working more closely together on test tools. Kind of final thoughts from you.
Yes, well, I will say that it's clear that we need an alternative. The community needs it, so we should rise in this alternative that we want to create and bring the whole community. And of course, the tools will be the baseline for having as quick as possible. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Emmanuel, very good point around, the markets globally and the different rates at which governments, industries are looking to move. So points from Roland and then really from Jay around that, and Sergio around focus. What final comments for you then really around how and where we should be focusing maybe to try to get that initial traction?
Yeah. I think we need to support the developers because when you start security evaluation, it can be quite huge work in terms of documentation, preparation, and so on. So if we try to work with developer, lab, and scheme to prepare a template, as you say, template on the documentation, template on the security policy, or maybe some, as we perform in the past for the common criteria to prepare some protection profile. All these type of documents help the developer and facilitate the evaluation and the process. So
that's a really good point. I mean, we've been focusing very much on the customer, the government, the end user, this kind of thing, but we should also be helping the vendor going through that process. And we can all expect jam tomorrow, as the saying goes, with automation this and automation that, but what can we do right now today to help facilitate and ease that process? And I think that's, first of all, again, it's that community. It doesn't just go up to government and all this, it then goes down to industry as well. And maybe this is where we need to focus a little bit first of all, and then focus on a subtext sector of industry, and then really help them through that process, as you said, and bring that whole ecosystem together from industry user, industry vendor, regulator, and then, as you said, the TIC community in the middle. Thank you. Miguel, finally from you, final thoughts really from your side?
Last and least, the only common thing here is the standard. And it's great that you have been able to sit all these stakeholders here, but the problem when discussing how to approach the vertical, how to approach the customer, is what are you going to present to them? Because you can do the testing one way or the other. You can do the certification one way or the other. You can use these tools or these others. So I think it's very important that there is an agreement here on how to do all those things. And those type of agreements happen to be the definition of a certification scheme. You have shown your certification scheme, but don't divide, because you will conquer nothing. So it would be very nice if from this initiative there would be a common and shared definition of the rules of the game. Because then the perception from the industry for the customer is quite simple. Is this one? It's not 25 or whatever. So in this state of development of maturity, it would be very nice to see a single proposal for a certification scheme, which only means the rules for doing things. The rules for the tools, the rules for the labs, the rules for the CVs, and then you agree, all these stakeholders agree on those rules of the game. And suddenly you are providing a single thing that end users can understand. Otherwise, they will have to understand the BSI scheme or the DECRA scheme or this and this and that. So to me, the next step in maturity would be that agreement of the rules of the game, which in standards for compliance, conformity, is called a certification scheme. Yeah.
Right, so that common approach goes from standard tools, the environment, etc., but ultimately it has to be that certification scheme. And that's really what we've been talking about from the outset. The fragmentation, the diversification of different national certification schemes. So we've got to make sure we don't create that same mess here.
So what's the validity of your certificate? 2 years. What's the validity of his certificate? 2.5 years. I don't know. So please join together and create a single certification scheme.
Great. So that's a challenge then back to the certification bodies, as well as pointing the finger at the labs about test tools, pointing the finger to the certification bodies as well about a common approach. Thank you. A very good way to close that. So thank you for the panel session. We're going to wrap up shortly. It's a round of applause for the panel, everybody. Thank you so much. I've just realised I've gone and sat everybody down because we run over a few minutes, and I didn't ask for questions. But do sit down, and we can. Do we have any questions from the room? First of all, we've got microphones around here. We can take questions. Any questions from around the room? We do have one. Please introduce yourself and ask away.
Hi, this is Pablo Corona from Mexico. It's very interesting to see different labs talking together and trying to standardize. Talking about the tools and the capabilities, the technical capabilities that a lab would need. We heard from Roland and Luis what are the testing tools that are available, but there are different tools available. What would be the minimum capabilities and the standard capabilities a testing lab need to have on one side? And on the other hand, what are those activities that add value? I'm sorry. Mustanir mentioned the certification process and mentioned that the rubber stamping thing is not what the certification body needs to do, but to add value through certain activities. He mentioned 3, but which other activities could add value to the certification process beside validating the testing report? So those are 2 questions, well, for the labs and for the certification.
I think the microphone. Oh, we're on. Thank you. And we'll probably take the first question to the labs first. I don't know, Luis, will you have any comments on that, or Roland? Luis, perhaps on the basic capabilities. What's the spread of tools? It sounded like there's test tools, but there's also the opportunity for that wider environment around documentation as well. But I think it was mainly the test tools, perhaps?
Not only the test tools, but the technical capabilities.
The technical capabilities.
Needed. Right.
Well, it's a complex question. I mean, finally, the standard defines the requirements. From the last perspective, you only need to give evidence that you meet the requirement. The tool that you use is not quite relevant, okay? I mean, we have, in fact, in the presentation, I had showed some of them, one that we use. But the key point is to give evidence to the reviewer that you have fulfilled the requirement properly.
I think there's a balance here. Part of the 17025 lab process is that the lab has to demonstrate that the test methodology was valid for actually producing that outcome. So we don't want to be too prescriptive in saying you've got to necessarily use this particular tool, but the lab then has to then justify and explain how that tool validates and proves the outcome, which does mean that you do need a certain level of skill sets within the lab. You can't just basically have an inexperienced technician saying, I've got this tool in, hit the button and go. So it does mean that the skills level within the lab need to be there to be able to understand and interpret rather how the test tool is working, rather than just take the results and do a comparison. So would that be a fair comment, Luis? Anything more you would add to that? So was there a particular issue behind that in terms then of is it the lab skills capability, or is it how to choose and evaluate a tool?
Not about the tools, but the capabilities, and more about the people capabilities. Which type of technicians, which profile, what type of studies and education they have?
That's a very good point. Miguel.
Well, at the end of the day, they need to understand what they're doing. So if we look at the standard, you have requirements on interfaces, requirements on functional behavior of the device. You have requirements on protection of particular data. You have requirements on resistance to tamper attacks. So the standard itself defines the test and indirectly the technical capabilities of the tester. So you could, of course, this type of standards do not need to be met by one single tester. You can have people who is efficient and fluent and familiar with physical attacks, people who is familiar with protocol validation of crypto algorithms. So, but there is a wide range, I mean, of techniques and knowledge that you need to have. And so there are several sections of the standard with different requirements, and the lab has to show that it has technical competence for all those things. So, yeah.
So with that, the competencies, one of the key things as well around the standard is it's evaluating the security controls and evaluating the valid implementation of a cryptographic algorithm. What it's not doing is evaluating the full efficacy of that algorithm and whether or not that algorithm is good enough. That is something outside of the scope. So that's really, really critical. And that's one of the advantages, again, of this standard, is that it is agnostic towards the particular algorithms. And because we slightly ran out of time and I stopped the panel session, one of the things we didn't ask, I think this is a very relevant question I'm going to pitch to Miguel here, and he probably knows what's coming. When it comes to algorithms, yesterday everyone was talking about post-quantum. So where does post-quantum really impact this standard? And Miguel, I know it's something we talked about, but really wanted to get this out in this domain as well. So would you want to give us your overview, really, of how...
It doesn't. It doesn't affect in the sense that the requirements are the same. So you have to validate the implementation and you have to make sure that the module protects the security parameters and protects the implementation and things like that. Whether that particular algorithm is resistant or not to quantum attacks is completely outside of the standard, of the scope. So it doesn't really matter. The standard is agnostic in terms of which algorithms are approved. That needs to be decided by the certification body. Not only the algorithms, but the key sizes, the protocols, authentication mechanisms, all those things. So the technicalities of the crypto techniques that the module needs to implement are not part of the standard, are part of the certification body that defines those. So in that sense, whether it's one algorithm or the other, of course, it affects the testing. You have to test it differently depending on the type of algorithm, but it is completely irrelevant, I would say.
Yeah. So I know that was a great question from yesterday about the whole post-quantum. And also yesterday they were talking about it's not going to be a binary situation. Suddenly there's a whole load of algorithms that we've got to switch over to. There's likely to be this kind of hybrid phase where you get composite algorithms that start to address some of the post-quantum aspects. All of that effectively can be managed. This overall certification here looks at the module itself and how that approved algorithm is implemented rather than the approval of the actual efficacy of the algorithm itself. So that means that it is, for the foreseeable future, robust in that sense. What I think will be probably future topic for this forum will be looking more into that post-quantum landscape and the kind of wider implications. But as far as the module goes and as far as this process goes, there's no immediate implication in terms of post-quantum. Just want to go back to your other question. Sorry, we are running out of time, around the value that the certification body adds. And this is something that does build with the scheme complexity. And as Mr. Neer said, it will be built up going forward. But what I have seen personally previously is test reports submitted as evidence for a product complying with a standard. And as the certification body, so you're looking at this and thinking, this was previously as a consultant, and I could see things like, well, the date of the report shows that this was tested before they'd even applied for this here. A previous version is the Are the assumptions within the test report right? Is the scope of the testing right? Does it all align? Are the right people with the right qualifications involved with the right level of oversight? So that is the very basic level of just absolutely validating that everything within the test report does relate to this product. It may sound obvious, but I've found many, many cases where test reports were submitted that were invalid. So that's the first and most basic value add that the certification body brings. Then the second thing is having a certificate that just says at the top level, this thing is compliant with this standard, versus then, as was hinted at, there's a 100-page test report. What does that mean to most of the clients for that product? This is one of the arguments I've seen elsewhere around, not quite related, but you'll have heard this around 27001 versus a SOC 2 test report. Everyone can get obsessed with a whole load of details here, but does this really actually solve an overall problem? And what does all that detail mean to the average procurement or manager, this kind of thing then as well? So that top level certificate is that other attestation trusted by somebody who is suitably qualified, experienced and independent to say, yes, this product complies with this standard. So that's that extra layer of trust. As the scheme gains in complexity, which will happen with what we're doing now, then there's start to look at things like surveillance, this kind of thing then as well. But we also do assessments, as Mr. Nair said, of the site, the competencies, and their ability to manage change, manage vulnerabilities, and all the other issues that sit around that product as well. So both the surveillance in terms of the quality of the product itself on an ongoing basis, and also the ability of the organization to actually support and trust in that organization, that's more where, again, the role of the certification body spreads around the actual test of the product itself. So it's something that grows from, at the base level, having absolute trust that this test report is valid and covers the product and scope, through to a certificate that is an independent attestation by a qualified accredited body that product actually complies. So that's where it starts from, and the end result is that full assessment of the organization, its test environment, and ongoing surveillance of the quality of the product itself, as well as testing any patches. So I've run a bit over time. I just want to really kind of summarize today. I'll be very open with everybody. When we looked at this next phase of these conferences that we've held, following the last one, we really made some good progress. There were certifications being announced, but it was all very much from the back going forward. What we had with the panel discussion was loads of nodding, yep, this is all great. And we came to this one, I'm thinking, I really need to see somewhere concrete, tangible, where we can move forward here and actually start making some impact, rather than all it seemed like a good idea. And it was great to see such involvement from particularly that panel discussion. And I think, for me, this has really helped shape, I think, where we go. So normally we've got a white paper in progress every year, and I kind of held off on this one because I really wanted to see where we went with this today. So all of the fantastic dialogue, both from the presentations and particularly from that panel discussion, will be feeding into our next white paper on this. And what we'll probably do is convene with the panel group after this event and follow up what particular target area we'll work on together. And that will then feed into our white paper for this year, which is very much going to focus on this real world application. So those are going to be the next steps. Everyone who is registered for the event will get a copy of the slides, and will also get notification of when the white paper's out. In the meantime, any last questions or points from anybody? Yes.
Thank you, David. I'm Thomas Lee from Huawei Technologies. Very glad to attend this meeting. I just have one last question. Because depending on the presentation of Roland, we have no doubting of the market potential of requirements. The only question is how to promote the market recognition of the 19790s certification. We should outreach to the customers. But unfortunately, today's meeting is a very good discussion, but there is no customer industry representatives here. So next step, what we're going to do. There is an open question that depending on the industry experience or the common way to go forward, do we need to form an industry alliance to systematically do the promotion? So this is an open question for everybody today, because we do need to talk with our customers. You know, I don't believe NIST is covering everywhere, especially when the digital transformation is happening in all industries. It's not the old-fashioned way of NIST is doing. We need to directly contact with our customers, not by one company by another, but one industry by another, to contact with any healthcare or whatever the industry, their alliance, to expand our market recognition. And I think this is the job that NIST didn't do in the past. That's my understanding here. I hope I'm not asking for an answer right now, but it's an open question to everybody to think over later. Maybe we can discuss next time.
I think that's a really, really good question. And that really is at the heart of all this. Where we go from here, I think, as you heard from Jay, from Roland in particular, was it's got to be focused on that industry need. And we can't just be a solution trying to find a problem. We've got to really engage with that. And you're right, this is something maybe that's needed collectively. Regarding NIST, I don't think that's something which should need you point a finger at NIST and saying they're doing anything wrong. It's a government organization there to solve that government problem first and foremost. So they're not there, that's not their role to do that. And that's why there is a gap, and this is where maybe our role steps in. So I think that's a really, really good challenge. And for me, that everything you've just said there, that's exactly what I'm thinking, is that fundamental, from everything we said here, we need to focus on that collective, how we address industry to ensure they're clear on what the risks are, the needs are, and as Roland said, what are they going to lose if they don't do this, as well as what they can win if they do. So I think that's a really, really good point to end it on, and that's exactly where I think our focus is going to be. Any more questions? If not, then thank you very much, everybody, for your time, for your participation, for some of the great questions, and particularly to our panelists here, Mustinir as well, and look forward to seeing you at the next one. And in the meantime, do look out for contact from us. We'll be reaching out to all of you, I think, on this follow-up on how to engage, because I don't think any one, two, a few of us have an answer. So you can all be part of shaping this going forward. Thank you, everybody. See you next time.